Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hi, I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Pat. I'm Russ.
And this is Fin the Week. Welcome back. It's nice to be back as well because I've been off on holiday. It was quite nice listening to the last episode, sat by the pool. Made a nice change.
Yeah, I can imagine. Hopefully we didn't mess it up too much without you there.
No, it was
I'd
all
quite like
sounding...
to listen. I'd quite like to sit by the pool listening to an episode.
Yeah, I love your commitment to the podcast as well, Amelia.
Yeah.
On holiday, on a sunbed, listening to a Fin the Week.
Yeah.
Of course.
To be fair, I don't know if I would actually.
Bring you right back down to earth, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to be loyal, guys. You've got to be loyal. So we're 3 weeks into Consumer Duty Awareness Month. And like I say, I did catch up on last week's episode, which was the first Teardown. So using Indulge's in-house tool, UX Duty, you looked at 3 current accounts. Do we want to just really briefly say what the overall findings were?
Yeah, I think the current accounts one was interesting because the things that stood out for me were the, how did we phrase it? It was sort of like there were kind of bold promises to entice people into switching, but then the terms and conditions, which were highly kind of relevant, were hidden in the small print, which felt wrong, really, kind of felt against the aims of Consumer Duty. Yeah, that was the main standout for me. I don't know if you guys had anything else that you thought really stood out.
No, I mean, I'm pretty much aligned with you, Paul. It was just kind of important thing was just surfacing those key points from terms and conditions to ensure that customers see more than just the headline promotional elements of that.
Yeah.
I think there was also the signposting to debt advice, which is now an obligation under Consumer Duty that they should be looking for the best outcomes for consumers. So there was a lack of that. Accessibility was, just almost every step in the journey was like riddled with accessibility issues. Color contrast, not explaining acronyms correctly or in the right places, assuming that people understand what various acronyms mean. And we even had a conversation about APR and how that's quite kind of difficult to explain. And there's a lot of kind of hidden costs associated with that. So it was quite, I think it was a good debate because the UX Duty findings surfaced a lot of conversations and there were some common themes like we'll see today. So it might not be specific issues that you'd expect FCA to intervene on, but I think overall there's kind of common themes in the digital journeys which I think which these firms should have on their radar, because as consumers, they are the kind of, they do make it difficult to understand these kind of products and this kind of hidden costs and things. So yeah, we'll see today that there's themes again rising to the top.
Well, it will be interesting to see because we're kind of going up a level this week from the most everyday FS product to one most people find pretty intimidating, and that is investing. So 3 robo-advisors, anonymised. Paul, what is the plan for today?
Yeah, we wanted to take a look at a different type of financial service or financial product. So this week we've been digging into, as you say, robo-advisors, because unlike bank switching, which feels fairly non-invasive, if you like, it's something that you could, I think most people could imagine doing. I think that the marketing around it has presented it as quite an easy process. But investing is a much more tricky concept because it can mean lots of different types of investing. And for some people, it will conjure up images of investment banking and big business and something that's just a whole different world to what they can get involved in. But on the other hand, there are brands out there who make, or certainly claim to make, investing very accessible. And technology and app-based finance has made it very accessible as well. Signing up for an ISA, for instance, is a relatively simple thing these days. So it's an area that I think is well worth us looking into and seeing how do brands present the journey, where might there be flaws, are there any findings that are similar to what we found with how the bank switching process worked. I think a bit of a spoiler alert is that accessibility rears its head again, which kind of, when we get into that, raises the question, is anyone taking accessibility seriously enough? Is that a real dropped ball across the board. So yeah, I think there's lots to look at.
Yeah, and then you've also got the rise of your kind of armchair investor using apps like Robinhood to kind of makes the whole process so seamless and takes out a lot of that intimidating kind of terminology, which has created, I think it was GameStop, remember the GameStop fiasco where GameStop became massively shorted and the community came around it. Just the stock price absolutely surged, even though the business was arguably not that viable. Everyone kind of became quite passionate about the brand and invested in it heavily to drive the share price up in order to basically get one over on all the short sellers. And then a huge other area to think about is, pump and dump crypto, which is huge. If you can work the system cleverly, you can make a hell of a lot of money, but most people just get completely done over and lose thousands, life savings amount worth of money in short-term meme coin sort of investment. So yeah, it's definitely a really consumer-focused area from in terms of what you can do these days compared to what you could do even like 5 years ago.
What's also quite interesting is it's a space that FCA aren't afraid of moving in on. So if you look at Enforcement Watch 2, they have intervened with a trading platform offering a contract for difference investment in the actual publication. It says it isn't just about price. So it isn't just about these firms perhaps making a bit of a cut with that kind of investment, perhaps what it was kind of before and after it, kind of at the beginning of the contract and the end, and making some money in between when it's kind of settled. They specifically said they're kind of looking at unsuitable features that lead to foreseeable harm or frustrates a retail client's intended use of the product or service. So it's easy to think that price and value as an outcome is just the price and value provided by that firm, and there isn't really much you can do about it in terms of a digital journey. But actually FCA are moving in on the fact that the foreseeable harm might be caused by the features on that platform. And that's actually quite a big difference, because then that is essentially UX. Are these platforms like Robinhood or eToro or the CFD platform, are they specifically manipulating these retail customers to invest more, lose their money, invest more, lose their money? Like, it's almost impossible to win. Then that becomes, and we've seen with this kind of CFD platform case, CA are moving in on it. It isn't just about what these firms are charging. It's about, how are they, how are these users interacting with these features, and is that interaction done in a fair way, which is really quite big.
So we've got these 3 firms, which we're keeping anonymous as with all of these episodes. So what is the approach with this one?
So what we've done is selected 3 firms, haven't we? And they represent different parts of the market. So yeah, how did you select them, Russ? Were they what sort of parts of the market do they?
Well, similar. I think in every teardown we're kind of selecting the firms in a similar way. So we're picking that big kind of a large firm or provider of the service, then a kind of mid-tier, and then a kind of small tier or challenger in the case of banks, as you would call it. And that gives us quite a broad range and in terms of the size of the firm that we're looking at, just to see whether, just to give a fair kind of view of the landscape, really. We're also referring to them as Firm A, Firm B, and Firm C, so try not to slip up and give any brand names on this one. I think I managed to last week somehow, but it's quite tempting to say the name, but we're going to keep them.
Well, I'm glad I don't know. Luckily, I don't know the name, so I don't have to worry about that. So should we jump in to this summary of the key findings? So 150 findings across the 3 firms. What did this look like?
Yeah, I mean, mixture of there was a mixture across the different outcomes. As you'd kind of expect, accessibility is quite high again. It's actually scarily easy to kind of find accessibility issues with every big website, every big firm. It's just the forgotten about sort of designing and building a website, which I'm not quite sure why, and it falls into that vulnerable customer category for Consumer Duty. So I think it's only a matter of time before it's higher priority for well for digital platforms to conform to WCAG. And it should be really, because I think, as we've discussed, it is a legal requirement for the public sector. So I'm not quite sure how these firms get away with it so easily. And there's some real blockers in terms, we'll discuss some specific ones, but there's some real blockers for screen readers. There's some real blockers for people with low vision. There's a lot of plain language issues as well. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if FCA, they'll actually finally move in on this at some point, because it is aligned with consumer duty.
It's, yeah, the accessibility thing is really stands out, because I was looking at the notes, and it's 53% of the issues that were uncovered in the process that we ran through were categorized as accessibility issues. And it's really fascinating, because is it that firms just don't prioritize it enough and they almost ignore those issues because they think they're just not important enough? Or is it that they maybe run out of resource to address these things and have to prioritize other things? Or is it that there's just wiggle room in the guidelines? Because I'm certainly not an expert in accessibility guidelines. I know more than your average bear about it, but having worked with developers who are much deeper into it, I know that there are grey areas within the accessibility guidelines. It's almost like you apply it like you would the law, in the sense that you look at precedent and you kind of deliver the best version of it that you can, rather than it being a checklist. What is the story behind that 53% though? I can't figure it out.
My view is that there's a couple of things going on here. Firstly, I just don't think it's high up on the agenda of any of the parties involved in creating these apps. So, for example, the firm themselves who are creating the brief, they've probably got must be accessible, CAGAA or something, as like a byline in the tender requirements. But you probably find that the team providing that tender don't really understand what that means or how to test it and how to validate that. And then the designers and the developers probably don't have accessibility in the forefront of their minds when they're pulling this together. And then you'll probably find that at the end of the process, there's a QA check, which is like run an accessibility checker. And then they run the accessibility checker and loads of things are like failing. And then retrofitting accessibility into an app that's already built is actually really, really difficult. To get it right, you have to plan for WCAG AA compliance from the beginning. And if you don't plan from the beginning, then it's really tough to retrofit that accessibility back in. And that's probably why it's not why it so commonly fails. And also you've got brands whose brand colours have been around for 20, 30 years, and they're fundamentally just not accessible. The contrast between their brand yellow and their brand green or something is just like not an accessible contrast. And so they have to step right back and actually review a rebrand in order to achieve accessibility. So there's probably a few factors going on. We've learned over the years from experiencing this process that I've just described, we've learned over the years that you have to build in accessibility from the start. And so we do. But that's because we've made these mistakes in the past and kind of learned from them.
Because we often talk about color contrast because it's quite an easy, understandable example of accessibility going right or wrong. But there are other far more technical things, like, for instance, building a site you can navigate using only your keyboard. I always find that quite interesting, because if you try tabbing your way through a website, that tells you sort of almost like how the information architecture is built and behind the scenes, and it reveals kind of how easy or frustrating a service is to use, because if you click tab, some sites will show you immediately skip to main content, and you can hit return and then you go to the main content. If that's not there, that sort of reveals to you how frustrating it would be to use a screen reader, because a screen reader might read out every single navigation item every time you load a page. And it's probably an open question we don't have an answer to right now, but it'd be interesting to see, of all of the issues we uncover throughout these teardown processes, how many are kind of innocuous things and how many are showstoppers like that would like really frustrate a user. That's probably something to look into.
That tab example, like writing your HTML in such a way that the tab order works and covers off every element in an efficient, orderly manner, is actually, like, if you're building the HTML, you have to have that in your head right from the beginning as a coder. And it's one of these things that often, if you're a junior coder or you're vibe coding something, or you're just kind of haven't got much experience in HTML, then you're not thinking about, what about the tab order? You're just thinking, how do I get this looking right in mobile and desktop? And so if you don't have an experienced developer working on your front end, then the chances are that little details like that, little accessibility details, are going to be dropped. Other things like highlighting the active component as you tab through the interface, is every active component highlighted, or does it just have the default kind of dotted line around it, or is it highlighted at all? All that kind of stuff. The devil is in the detail with accessibility, and it takes experienced developers to kind of piece together something that works really well from a WCAG perspective.
I was just looking at some of the findings and missing, I think what you're referring to is the content landmarks, if they're missing, and that's been thrown up multiple times. And really the only way to check, and it's quite simple really, and most people, unless they're not using it a lot, might have actually activated it by mistake on their Mac, which is VoiceOver. You might have activated VoiceOver by mistake with the keyboard combination. You literally just have VoiceOver on, you can tab through the site. It's just simple check to make during your kind of QA phase if you're designing a building or something, and then you'll know. It's often the people testing it might not be the developers who have worked on it. Then you kind of have that kind of validation. In terms of the most common issues, kind of I've come back to WebAIM quite a lot in the last, since we started the podcast really, because they're a really reputable source of data on this. And actually, I know this podcast isn't just accessibility, but I always find it quite fascinating that 90% of all the errors that they find on the web fall into just 6 categories. It'd be interesting to see if the ones that we've found align with this. And low contrast text is by far like the biggest problem across the whole web. Missing alt text, missing format input labels, empty links and buttons, which for screen readers make them almost completely unusable, and missing document language as well, which again for a screen reader could be a real issue, understanding how to actually, what language to use for that page. So yeah, 96% of all issues across the board kind of fall into those 6, and then there's kind of the bits in between, some of which UXGC has kind of picked up on. So it'd be really interesting that the data's there is to pull out all the accessibility issues. Perhaps this is another session we could do, just focused on it, pull them all out and see if it actually aligns with kind of like WebAIM, and whether we're falling into those 6 kind of categories, and what can be done about it. I imagine color contrast will still be the number one, picks up on a lot of those. And it really is just quite unbelievable with the, when people are investing money or moving money around and signing up for savings accounts, how these firms could get that so wrong.
So I was going to say, just looking at the summary of issues found as part of this sort of teardown process, Firm A had 58 issues, Firm B 29, Firm C 63. Using just those numbers, Firm B was arguably better, although I don't know what those issues were. But just remind us, is Firm A is the sort of big player, Firm B the mid-tier, Firm C is the sort of kind of fintech, if you like.
Yeah, it should be.
Right in thinking, Paul, that all 3 would rank as high risk on our consumer duty risk bands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And are you surprised by that?
Well, that's how UXGC have flagged it. But, there's still, we just bootstrapped this app. It's still kind of being developed all the time. It's definitely quite a subjective view of the app, whether it's kind of high risk, and it's quite critical. I think if something doesn't conform to the kind of consumer duty rule, we could probably adjust that a bit. So all of the accessibility issues are low unless they're reoccurring. So it's more picking up on specific rules where, part of the scan is using AI. And as we know, AI doesn't always get everything right. So it's kind of looking at it from a qualitative viewpoint as well, and what it thinks. So, it has got quite kind of critical eye and will kind of flag things as high. So yeah, I'd take that with a pinch of salt, but there's a lot of issues which don't conform with the consumer duty rules, which kind of add up. And it's looking at a digital journey specifically, saying that there's a high risk. So yeah, you could argue that is right.
I suppose for people who perhaps haven't listened to the last couple of episodes, we're running these firms' processes through an app that we built some time ago, UXGT, which basically we plug in parts of the user journey, so like pages that represent parts of a user journey. The app will run through it, it will identify issues, and then assign a score based on how high risk a situation is. And as you say, Russ, that's kind of subjective, but on the other hand, it's probably configured to be quite risk averse which is how a compliance team would view things as well, I would say. In my experience of working with marketing and operations teams who report to compliance teams, the compliance team is always risk averse, and therefore having UX duty be configured to flag a high risk when you might be able to argue it's a medium risk, probably how the team would view it as well.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about some specifics. So how risk warnings, how are they dealt with? What were the findings when it came to risk warnings?
So, I mean, this is quite an easy one to go to any of these websites and see, is that you've got this big shiny like return headline, how much money you're going to make, you invest £1,000, you're going to be a millionaire in 10 years. But the small print is your capital is at risk and you might lose everything, which especially with retail investing is probably more likely. But you'd like to think with the kind of robo-advisor side of it that your money's safe, because you're trusting, especially some of the bigger brands, you are trusting that their kind of algorithms and there's a human in the loop, that your money kind of would perhaps be a bit safer with these, setting up an account with some of these big firms. From a consumer understanding perspective, I think where these journeys are breaking down, and consumer understanding specifically as an outcome, the firms do have an obligation to kind of make that clear, and they're not really displaying these warnings in the right place. Some of them are in the footer, some of them are buried below these big like green bold messages that you're going to get 90% return if you're like on the highest risk profile, and then below it kind of explains the risk. So it's important that these interfaces have that risk closely aligned, that it's not hidden away, that the color's accessible, that it's not too small, that uses plain language. And that's where these firms are failing. Now, there's obviously a sales perspective here for these firms, isn't there? They want people to create these accounts, and if they had the prominence of your capital is at risk alongside the returns, then that's going to put people off creating an account. And the more prominent they make that, the probably less people are going to sign up. But what's worrying is just where it's positioned, and that and the color of it's normally gray, or some of it sometimes it's not even, doesn't even feel like it's on the page. So yeah, that consumer understanding rule, I'd say, is being kind of broken. That is not really clear enough what risks you have with these. And yeah, it'd be quite easy to open up an account, have your appetite for risk is high, and then perhaps be surprised which way things go.
And what do we think? Is it fair to expect firms to place risks, equal to potential benefits, perhaps? Because it sounds like that's not what they're doing. Can we expect that? Will we expect that? Should we?
Yeah. Yes, because you wouldn't, from a marketing perspective, you have to make your product and your offer enticing, and you have to sell the benefits, the potential benefits in the case of investing. And you don't really want to then dilute's probably not the right word, but kind of position it alongside, but here's what could happen if things went wrong. But at the same time, you have to educate your customers. I was trying to think of how could you look at this in how other areas of the world work. Like if you were booking a driving instructor, you wouldn't have a warning on that driving instructor's website saying, but you might crash and you might end up with whiplash. But
this driving instructor has a 65% fail rate.
Yeah. But I don't know. And then it gets back to even more basic things. Like, does that indicate, like the fact that you need warnings like this, does that indicate a lack of general knowledge across the population? Like, for instance, are schools teaching about like what is investing and how does it work? Like back when I was at school, that certainly wasn't a part of the discussion. I don't know what it's like these days. I'll find out in a few years' time when my daughter kind of gets a bit older. But, even just a basic level of understanding about how the world of investing works would kind of negate the need for a lot of these, what are basically quite kind of condescending warnings, I suppose.
I think it's because the stakes are so high, and naturally investing is quite a complicated thing, and people, I don't think they're ever, you could teach kids about investment, and we talked about understanding what an APR is last week, but even then it's quite a complicated concept, and a lot of people just wouldn't understand it. And I think it's a combination of high stakes and the desire to make a lot of money, which everyone has, most people have, combined with the promotion that says double your money in 5 years without describing the risk, and someone puts their life savings in and 50 grand or 100 grand, and then 2 years later it's worth 30 grand and they've been completely done over. I think that's why it's important to be absolutely clear. And I think the messaging shouldn't be double your money in 5 years and then in small print, or by the way, you could halve your money in 5 years as well. The messaging should be, our product is a high risk product and your gains could range from 50% improvement through to 50% loss. It's our performance. It should be completely clear at the top level. I don't think any of the negatives should be like hooked out in small print. And that should be your product. And then the user can make an informed choice about what's right for them. So they could go high risk and they could say, well, you know what, I can afford to lose half my life savings, because the benefits of the growth are important. But actually, I can't afford to move my life savings. So actually, I'm going to go with the low risk product. You're much more likely to earn 5% interest over 5 years. And the worst case scenario is that you might lose 2%. So I think that, I just don't think any of these negatives should be anywhere in small print at all. They should be upfront, clear.
So
because that's financial advisors. That's how they're trained to brief the products into their clients.
So that's risk warnings. Let's talk about cost transparency and how that was looking.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one because I think it's aligned with the rule that FCA call this the product life cycle. So consumers should have a full view of what additional costs might be if they specifically leave a product. And what the firms won't particularly care about is any exit charges or transfer kind of charges. It'd probably be more exit charges in this case, because if you have some money invested, can you just move that money out kind of when you want? Now, if there isn't any charges, the firm still needs to make it clear that there isn't any charges. And that's what these firms that's what they weren't doing. So it's not giving that full picture of the life cycle. So they may not charge it, but the issue is the consumer doesn't have that full view of the life cycle. So what are the admin fees? What are the costs if I decide within a month I want my money back? Didn't really give that kind of information. At least that's what UX-Duty picked up. And I have kind of validated some of these as well. I couldn't really find anything specific. Yeah, and then also, it's not this one actually. Yeah, it kind of covers two rules: consumer understanding and consumer support. So yeah, they're only seeing half the price essentially if they can't see the exit costs, which is an issue. I think that's where, again, we go back to that financial advisor piece, and websites can be a little bit two-dimensional in this way in terms of the way that they put these packages forward, especially if you're looking on a mobile device. On a desktop, you can kind of soak in this information a bit more. As we know, mobile usage is really high. You visit one of these sites, it's kind of difficult even on an interface perspective to outline exactly what all the costs are going to be. And they certainly wouldn't want to be highlighting the percentage of an exit charge. But they should make that clear, and that's what they failed to do.
I'd I'd go further than just even the charge, but the exit process, because speaking from experience, I've got I use like an app-based stocks and shares ISA thing, which is really good, works really well. It's easy to transfer money in. It's very transparent about how it's invested and what the projections are and stuff like that. But it just occurred to me that I thought, actually, I've got no idea how I would transfer money out of this. There's nothing obvious in the app about how you'd do that. Because I thought, if we need that money at some point, how do you do it? And so I kind of just dug around in a kind of spare moment. And eventually I found where it was. It was hidden within a couple of layers of submenus. And then you have the option, there was a button about transferring money out. I didn't go further than that. So there's still a bit of a gray area about how exactly does that process work. And I haven't gone into the docs to look at kind of, does it describe it in the support pages? I'm sure it does somewhere. But yeah, it just occurred to me that actually that's not an obvious or an easy process, but investing in is extremely easy. Like, I really could just switch my brain off and do it. Whereas investing at getting the money out, it's not anywhere near as obvious. And that's a massive flaw, surely.
Patterns. Is kind of the name of the UX, the kind of interface design techniques that that kind of encourage users down a sort of one-way path or down a specific path that might not be the best path for them. It really is a kind of, a fairly nefarious practice that you see everywhere. Once you know it, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's what FCA are referring to for this CFD platform as well, that they intervene with unsuitable features. I think they've called it. It'd be great to see some specific examples from FCA of, what it is good and bad practice. I mean, a bit like us, obviously, just using the firm A, firm B, and firm C. I guess they have an obligation not to call out exactly what it is, because then that might, if they say exactly what it is and it's a unique feature to that platform, then they're essentially perhaps giving away the name of that firm, which might be why they're consciously quite vague in the way that they're saying what the issues are on these platforms. But this one, you see a lot, don't you? Just in every walk of life, it's easy to get in. It's normally quite hard to get out.
With the finding of, so firm A and firm C were kind of deemed to not be transparent about the exit cost, but the entry sort of process was easy. Does that mean firm B did get this right, or was it just not flagged as a critical issue for them? Do you know?
Yeah, it looks so in the compilation report here, which is quite interesting. And actually, the next one we're going to talk about here, one of the firms did a better job than the other two of. I'm not going to ruin your segue here, Amelia, but maybe I'm going to give you one. But yeah, firm A actually describes the investor on the next one, but the other two didn't.
Shall we talk then about eligibility? Is that where we go? Is that where you were going, Russ? With eligibility, so how clear was it showing about the eligibility? Where did that come along in the process?
So this is another one, similar vein, really. You kind of get the feeling that these firms want to get just people to sign up. They probably want to capture their details, marketing purposes. They want to get people as far through the process as they can. But it is important. It's another rule as well that firms must clearly define the target market for their products. And it wastes time, doesn't it? If you're going through an application process and you find out halfway through you need to have a certain amount of money to invest, or you need to be, I don't know, you need to invest a certain amount every month or to get the rate or whatever. Two of the firms did this more poorly than the other one. UXGT can only get so far through a process. I actually introduced a new feature. I developed a new feature on the app for this specifically, where if there was just to continue, because a lot of these forms exist under a single URL, so UXGT will actually click continue if there isn't any form data it needs to populate, or if it's pre-populated already, which you often get, it can kind of go through to the next steps. It can't complete an attitude to risk questionnaire or sign up to an account. But for one of the firms, it managed to get through to the next step, which was quite interesting, because then it could analyze that whole page, which was quite a complex interface. And there wasn't anything about eligibility or what you needed to kind of have an account. Now, if you explore the site, you could probably find it somewhere, but it needs to be there when you're actually looking to sign up to the product. It needs to be really clear. Some of these forms use progressive disclosure as well, the design pattern I've been talking about quite a bit because of generative UI by like AI, but you'll find that the eligibility probably comes across as you go through the form. So it'll ask you various questions and then you're kind of figuring out as you go, but you are wasting a lot of time if you get to like step 3 and then you're asked something about your assets, let's say, and you don't pass that. Yeah, just needs to be much kind of clearer. It needs to be clearly defined as as one of the rules under consumer duty as well. So yeah, I kind of understand they want to keep user journey simple. They want to, capture people's information, but it's important that if you're eligible before starting the application, and that needs to be easy to find.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask this question. I was like, do you think this is a sneaky way or a sneaky process? Is it just a natural part of the journey? They're making it smoother by creating these smaller steps. Are we being too hard on these firms, or actually do they need to do better?
I think it's, I think one argument, because the thing that firms seem to do is they want, as you said, Russ, they want people to start the process so they can capture as many details as possible, so that anybody who drops out of the funnel after that point, they at least know. You could argue it's a form of user research in a way, to understand where there's demand that isn't currently being fulfilled. So if your eligibility criteria requires a certain level of investment and a lot of people are getting to that point and then dropping out, that might be evidence you then take to the board of your company and say, we need to develop a product that addresses this part of the market, which is useful. Is that certainly useful data, but from a customer's point of view, is that fair? I don't think it necessarily is. Yeah, so I think it is a bit sneaky, actually.
So let's move on to vulnerability support. What were the findings there?
Well, this is, I think we've touched on this already, but the vulnerability side of investing is, it's something to be taken seriously. Could be I think we talked about first-time investors with kind of little knowledge, and taking advantage of those. It could be someone who has a bereavement, for example. It could be someone with a kind of low kind of digital literacy kind of skills, and not really being able to understand perhaps what they're signing up for. So there's kind of a lot of different scenarios, I think, where vulnerability could be supported better. They're just kind of assuming that everyone knows what investing is, I think, and they don't have any kind of challenges. That's the feeling that you get when you land on these sites. There's no real, I was thinking about kind of improvements as well. I think just some signposting, whether people need a bit of support. Do they need to speak to somebody? It sounds like a simple thing. If you're stuck, call this number, not an AI chat, which could be kind of giving, which, if you're stuck, arrange a call with a financial advisor, kind of pop up, and you could maybe go to a calendar and arrange a time to actually speak to someone, or perhaps pop into their office. It's that other route, isn't it? It's providing that other route and having that clearly signposted.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Why are firms
stuff.
not doing this? Why are they not doing it, do you think?
Well, like I said, I think there's probably, I get the feeling that when these sites are designed, they don't really take into account all these different personas. And I think this is where consumer duty is really, really coming in as a good thing for consumers, because there's the focus on vulnerable customers. Firms now need to kind of consider them as they can't just turn away from the fact that people are in all these kind of different vulnerable situations when they're visiting the site. And also signposting to the ombudsman as well, which I know FCA kind of mentioned quite a lot in their documentation. If you need to speak to them, some signposting to them, and then just reducing the kind of friction in the journeys as well. So there's a few things that they could do better, but I really like that one. Just kind of speak to a person. It seems to be quite a difficult thing for these. It's more administration, obviously, but for some people, that's what they want to do. I certainly would. If I was investing £10,000, I'd probably be using these websites as my research phase, and perhaps who to call and have a meeting with.
I wonder if at the briefing stage, this stuff gets missed out. I might be being really unfair to teams who run these things, but when they're preparing a brief for a new front-end system, presumably they will focus on their kind of personas or their ICP, ideal customer profile, and perhaps that set of users that they're imagining this app for won't include the vulnerable as a high priority audience. Or at the very least, it'll be a kind of tier 3 audience or something. And therefore, a system gets built perfectly for the users that they imagine are going to be their customers. And then the compliance element is almost a sort of now make it past compliance. And so there's a few bolt-on things. But actually, would all of this be solved by baking in this consideration right from the off? Which is what we kind of concluded with the accessibility stuff.
So I was going to say, and actually, if they did bake in support for these vulnerable people, would that result in just loads more people coming on board? And if you're targeting like people in their sort of twilight years who might have cleared their mortgage 10 years ago and they've got a build up of cash and they're looking to invest that cash, like if they supported vulnerable people really well, then a lot of those middle-aged and older people who perhaps are starting to have failing eyesight or aren't so great in technology, perhaps they'd get more of those people coming online. It's definitely a consideration.
Yeah, you literally took the words out of my mouth, actually. That's what I was going to say. They focus so much on trying to get people through the process to capture their details. But actually, what's more important is actually getting, obviously supporting these people. But if from a business perspective, they're looking at getting more people to invest, you're exactly right, because it's the people who need a bit more support. It's not like they have less money to invest. And there's actually something called is it the purple pound, which is accessibility? There's the purple pound and the grey pound, isn't there? I think purple might be accessibility, grey is the kind of aging population. But these are, if they support these kind of vulnerable customers, that's in their best. That's not only in the best interest for the consumers, but also for these firms. If a user has low digital confidence and they go onto this website, it doesn't make any sense. It might put them off using it completely. They have, we're talking about screen readers. If they can use it with a screen reader, then they're going to trust this. They're going to trust this firm, aren't they? They're going to. We're talking about, I think that 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability at some point in their lives. This is, it's not rare. And I think that kind of trust that you would gain by supporting all of these users, I think not only would conform to consumer duty, but also result in more business. So yeah, it really feels like, and it needs the spotlight on it more. And we keep on coming back to it on these podcasts because it is such a major factor, and it's so clear to see, frustratingly clear to see, really.
Yeah, seems so obvious, doesn't it? So, Russ, is there anything else, any other key points that you wanted to mention?
Well, the last discussion point, and I think it's accessibility as well. I didn't pick this firm on purpose, although I was quite happy when it actually came up in the scan results. I didn't go through all these, I didn't find a firm. These firms are almost completely random really at the start. So I haven't picked firms which specifically have challenges, just picked 3 firms and then, I haven't kind of swapped them out. I think when I was first doing it, I swapped a couple out only because UX was kind of struggling to kind of scan them. But this one, just 3 firms, stuck with them. The scans were what they were. And their primary color used across the whole website is inaccessible. I'm not going to say the firm, but it's bright red, and it isn't the one you're thinking of. It's another one. It was quite a shocker actually, because it's their primary brand color. It's also used on all their buttons. It's used like on the homepage. Every step of the journey was flagged for color contrast issues. Red's notoriously quite a difficult color to work with anyway because of error messaging, but I get it. Some brands do it really well. It's a primary color. I think it's great that some kind of brands embrace it. Some of them do it really well, but you need to get the contrast right. You can't just have a really bright red with white text on. There's loads of reasons why. We talked about low vision, age-related eye conditions, perhaps missing out on that whole market who kind of struggle to use the website. So bright, situational accessibility is a really good example where you might be using your laptop in, in an airport next to like a bright window, and you can't see that contrast of the white text on the button. Even in an office, shining through a window, that might put you off using the site or might be inaccessible, because that's why these contrast ratios exist. It isn't just for low vision. So yeah, it's a real clanger. You see it with the old classic grey text on a white background, but your primary company color. And we have actually done some projects before. Pat, you mentioned that perhaps some of these older brands, accessibility wasn't taken seriously. We recently had a client a few years ago who had a color and in their brand, and we actually got them to change the tone. We added a bit of darkness to that color, made it accessible, and they updated that across their whole company. And they completely transformed how usable their kind of digital presence was. We had another company recently as well where we took away one of their colors. It actually looked a lot more professional, but it was a highlight color. It's inaccessible, and now their site is so much easier to use because it conforms. It just looks better, and they've rolled that out across everything from brochures to emails and everything. So yeah, it sounds like a small change, but if you get color contrast right, it can have big impacts.
Do you think this is something they're more than aware of? Do you think, Firm B, they've got creatives sitting in their meetings, begging, pleading, let's change this? And do you think do you think they're fully aware of this?
So yeah, I'll be surprised if they're not aware of it. But because it's baked in, as what I was saying right at the beginning, like sometimes these contrast issues come from colours that are deeply baked into the brand. And so they're probably looking at this thinking, that's an accessibility issue. But actually to change that, we're going to have to completely revisit their brand. And you probably find that they've got a big brand project in the pipeline, and they've got this issue earmarked to be resolved as part of this brand project. But it's like, 2 or 3 year project. So they're just like part of the accessibility issue in the meantime.
I wonder if
probably what's going to happen. Yeah, that's what's going on under the bonnet, I'd say.
Yeah, and I wonder if people underestimate how annoying issues like that are. Like a website that has every page has an issue like that, where the contrast is just difficult enough to be a pain in the backside for people who don't have issues reading it, and then it's a genuine issue for people who can't see it. It's a bit like when you walk into the way I think of it is like when you walk into a supermarket and they've changed where something lives in the aisles, and it really throws you for a while. Like it feels like that when you're using a system that is sort of badly designed from an accessibility point of view.
Often users can't articulate what is causing them to struggle. They just go to the site and suddenly their cognitive load is higher, and they're trying to figure out their journey through the site, and they get through it, but at the end of it, they're just like, oh, that was tough. And then they're less inclined to go back later. You ask the user, why was that tough? And they're just like, I don't know. I just didn't like the site. But actually, when you break it down, it's because the color contrast is wrong and their eyes are hurting, they're struggling to read it, and the drop down menus are glitchy, and there's probably a whole list of things that just increase that cognitive load for a user and reduce the overall kind of quality of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, if an app's riddled with kind of bright colors, that always puts me off. If they're used for interaction elements, so it's important as well to understand that this firm could keep that red as their brand color. Just don't use it on your call to actions. Don't use it on your buttons. It doesn't need a brand overhaul. Make your buttons, a different color. Make them black with white text on. Find a different way of using it if it's so ingrained, and that's led by the design team really. But also it needs to be prioritized by the management team above. And I can only imagine what would happen if the board received a report, depending on these big firms, that the red isn't accessible. I mean, it's not going to be high up on that pack, is it? That pack of things they need to do within that firm. But actually, it is really important and could make such a huge difference to their customer base.
Yeah. I guess at board level, they might be receiving this feedback, but there's probably no link for those board members between this accessibility issue and actually returning customers and ROI and impact on revenue. They'll be looking at their sales strategy and their marketing strategy and where the growth is going to come from, and they'll probably mark down accessibility as like a minor issue. But actually, when you think about it, probably does impact their growth, because their users are some users will probably be struggling with it. They either might not sign up or they might not invest as much as they would otherwise because they prefer an alternative platform because it's just easier to use.
Clearly, I mean, accessibility has been a massive theme that's run already through these first 2 teardowns. It'll be interesting to see what happens next week, and we will chat a bit more about that after a quick game of Jargon Busters. You got on all right last week.
Yeah, full points awarded. It was
Paul, how did you feel being on the other side of things?
That was good fun. I enjoyed going into the secret spreadsheet to pick out a term. And
so,
Did you look at all of the upcoming terms? And
I had a quick whiz through, yeah.
In case you've never caught this before, Jargon Busters is where I put the guys to the test. I pick a word at random from our Jargon Buster list. These are kind of industry terms, and we see how well they can explain the meaning. This week's term is bull market. Are those
I always
blank
get
faces?
confused between a bull market and a bear market. I know one of them is where everyone's got loads of confidence and everyone's investing, willing to take a bit more risk, and the other is everyone's a bit more timid and kind of risk averse and concerned.
I couldn't
tell you which one was which. I think bull is maybe I think bear is maybe the timid one. Bull is maybe the confident one.
Isn't there a big statue of a bull outside? Is it?
Yeah. New York Stock Exchange.
It's the New York Stock Exchange. So I'd be very surprised if they had a statue of the one that brings the market down. So almost certainly it's when the market's thriving and everything's going up, which is a bull.
Yes. So bull market where prices are rising or expected to rise.
Yeah. I'm interested as to why a bear is the timid version, because bears are not timid. Very scarier than bulls.
Very true, very true. Maybe that's a whole other discussion point for a whole other episode. But
Yeah,
well
maybe
done.
like dormouse market.
Yeah.
Exactly. It needs a rebrand. So well done. We'll have more of that next week. And talking about next week, we're going to have our next teardown. We're moving on to mortgages. This is going to be interesting because probably biggest financial decision most people will ever make, right, Paul?
Yeah. And I think mortgages was the next one we chose because for a couple of reasons. Yeah, one, it's a huge decision people make, and it's something that I think people aspire to. It's certainly in the UK, the culture we have here is that you aspire to own your own property. And that's kind of a life ambition for a lot of people. I think it's maybe less so in some other countries, but what it means is that the world of mortgages is something that a lot of people will be aiming for, but it's quite fragmented. So when you are looking for a mortgage, you might be going via a broker, you might go direct to a lender, or there is a servicer. So you could have 3 different firms dealing with your mortgage product. So yeah, and it's something that the FCA is actively looking at the moment. So it made sense that that's the next area we dig into.
Looking forward to getting into it. That is next week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next Friday.
See you then.
Cheers.
Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialize in UX and design, production, and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.